I am Dr. Bandy Lee, forensic and social psychiatrist, president of the World Mental Health Coalition, and convener of the 2017 Yale conference that led to the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 Psychiatrists and Mental Health Experts Assess a President. My colleagues and I came forward in unprecedented ways because of the unprecedented dangers we saw and the critical need for our expertise. But we were also shut down in unprecedented ways because, like in all authoritarian times, truth, which empowers the public, had become a threat. Amid this silencing, the dangers could only spread, as illustrated in my recent book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion, an existential threat to American democracy and all humankind. Now we're trying to rectify this vacuum of the most relevant expertise through a new book and a major all-day conference at the National Press Club. In early January 2018, after Donald Trump boasted in a tweet that his nuclear button is a much bigger and more powerful one than North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's, interviews exploded. I was speaking with reporters for 15 hours a day, every single day, almost without a break. And I had to put aside all other tasks to attend to this national need. But I felt very encouraged that despite the threat, clarity dominated the discussions, and even television producers seemed enlightened. I highlighted the dangers of nuclear war in my interviews, as I was well aware of how humankind had narrowly escaped nuclear annihilation more than a dozen times in history. A foolish error could spiral into the end of all civilization, even before Trump entered into the equation. But with Trump added into the mix, the perils multiplied 1,000-fold. There was not a major network or cable news program that did not invite me, and although I was very cautious and selective at first, there was a sense of much of the nation finally coming together in a time of crisis. At this time, I was told that I introduced the word dangerous, and along with it, a new way of thinking about the then president. I felt that this was what the lawmakers were speaking of when they recommended that we educate the public medically so that they could intervene politically. There would be a spontaneous recognition that not even a president is immune from mental impairments, and as first citizen, he also deserved the medical standard of care. It was a critical time for setting the correct discourse on an unprecedented situation. It took our getting to a crisis point, but I thought finally a solution was imminent. Lawmakers relied on us, seeming to be thinking foremost of the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution or impeachment. And indeed, a bill on the 25th Amendment was gaining ground in the U.S. House of Representatives to form a body that included psychiatrists chosen by both parties. The 25th Amendment is a provision put in place after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy to outline the procedures for replacing the president or vice president in the event of death, removal, resignation, or incapacitation. Section 4 of the amendment states, whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmits a declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. Medically, there seemed no question that this was the kind of moment for which the 25th Amendment was written. I received confirmation when I was invited to speak alongside the original drafter of the amendment and former dean of Fordham Law School, John Farrick, who emphasized that the implementation of the amendment was meant to be driven by the data, in other words, medical data. This meant that education was even more critical with psychiatric issues, since a coma or overt dementia laypersons can recognize, but not the most deceptive conditions, which are also the most dangerous. In medicine, there is no distinction between incapacities. A person is incapable to the degree of the incapacitation, regardless of reason or diagnosis. So this was not a partisan matter. And despite considerable politically driven noise, the American public proved to be in a far better place than initially assumed. As my psychiatric compendium, becoming an unprecedented bestseller of its kind, proved, as well as our appropriately catapulting to the #1 topic of national conversation. This was far beyond anything we expected of a mental health issue. All this was organic. What ensued, tragically, was orchestrated by none other than the American Psychiatric Association. At the height of our influence, all rational discourse seemed to come to an abrupt halt, and the nation from there on spiraled into a state of irrationality where anything goes in terms of discourse. This happened when the American Psychiatric Association, through aggressive and unprofessional language that startled me at the time, denigrated us as practicing armchair psychiatry. It said, "We at the APA call for an end to psychiatrists providing professional opinions in the media about public figures whom they have not examined, whether it be on cable news appearances, books, or in social media. Armchair psychiatry, or the use of psychiatry as a political tool, is unacceptable and unethical. The APA is ready to make recommendations from among our own members who have the knowledge, training, expertise, discretion, and objectivity to perform a thorough and apolitical evaluation. Using psychiatry for political or self-aggrandizing purposes is stigmatizing for our patients and negatively impacts our profession." The inflammatory language very much echoed that of a past APA president who crusaded against us, mainly because I believe after a few interactions with him, he was furious that Congress members consulted with us and not with him. His distinct language style came out in the APA statement as if he dictated it, and many of you who know who he is will recognize it. Much like the characteristic manner of Donald Trump being identifiable behind the exaggerated language of his former physicians, Harold Bornstein and Ronnie Jackson, when they stated he would be the healthiest individual elected to the presidency, or might live to be 200 years old. Many fellow professionals urged me to sue the APA for a defamation, and Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland offered to gather fellow Congress members to issue a statement declaring that they wished to hear from us as experts. These are suggestions I should have taken, but I had not yet imagined the depths of corruption of the APA. I thought it would be embarrassing to have to do either of these things. But this past APA president did not stop there, but met with the New York Times editorial board in a way that caused it to write an article that seemed an obvious dictation of himself with the crude title, "Is Mr. Trump Nuts?" It said, "A number of psychiatrists who should know better have increasingly taken up the Trump is crazy line. The dangerous case of Donald Trump concluded that Mr. Trump presents a grave and immediate danger to the safety of America and the world. No argument there, but why do we need to hear it from psychiatrists? Dr. Bandy Lee, one of the book's editors, said the authors are assessing dangerousness and not making a diagnosis. Anyone with access to newspapers or Mr. Trump's Twitter feed can do the same." Again, the language and thinking style of the past APA president were distinctly identifiable. Further in, the editorial stated that the 25th Amendment and impeachment were useless, and the solution was to vote. To which my question was, why should the body politic not have all three options? Isn't the very reason for voting in representatives to have them act on their behalf? What would happen if the most important voices at that moment were the only voices not allowed to speak on behalf of the public in the area of their expertise? At this time, there were signs of contagion of symptoms in the general population and the political sphere. For example, Senator Lindsey Graham said of Donald Trump, "I think he's a kook. I think he's crazy. I think he's unfit for office." Then, upon Donald Trump's election, he instead criticized the press for what he himself had said. This endless attempt to label the guy as some kind of kook not fit to be president, he said. Senator Ted Cruz had called Trump a pathological liar, a narcissist, a bully, utterly amoral, and a serial philanderer who doesn't know the difference between truth and lies. He lies practically every word that comes out of his mouth. Donald will betray his supporters on every issue. That's what he said. Yet, in November 2016, he voted for Donald Trump and even hugged him. Contagion is different from rational decision-making and even cynical political calculation. It has the quality of being wildly irrational, and sometimes the affected person does not even see how one is acting to one's detriment. While the term is sometimes used colloquially for non-rational spread that is innocuous or positive, such as contagious yawns or an infectious laughter, but here I'm referring specifically to irrational psychopathology, since the nature and speed of spread is different from natural life-affirming influences. For example, contagion accelerates and is more likely to become quote-unquote viral, as seen in social media, when there are negative emotions or worse, actual symptoms. Contagion in American society has also become far more forceful and prevalent because of the actual severity of symptoms in Donald Trump and his length of time in an influential office with all the exposure it entails to the public. Thus, his emotions of rage, grievance, and revenge, his penchant for violent and aggressive retaliation, and his poor tolerance for reality would eventually become examples of symptoms that have spread over time through his persistent exposure. There are multiple mechanisms for this, but the point here is that those bonded with Trump were susceptible to adopting his feelings, beliefs, ideas about the world, and actions in unhealthy ways. Because the emotional pressures behind symptoms are fierce, combined with other pathological dynamics, over time, their distinct personalities would disappear, and their characteristics resemble more and more Trump's. As more and more people succumb, there would be two major dangers, as with any loss of mental health: the acceleration of spread, mainly through self-destructive behavior, and the growing loss of insight, or the ability to see that anything is wrong. Under normal circumstances, one might have expected an institution such as the APA to serve in a mitigating role or as an antidote to such a threat to societal mental health, but to the shock and dismay of many insiders, it did the opposite. In the end, dangerous symptoms require containment. Senator Barry Goldwater finished as a respected elder statesman who successfully advised President Richard Nixon, who was facing imminent impeachment, to resign in 1974. However, it is unknown whether Goldwater remained subdued precisely because he was kept from the presidency. After all, statements such as extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, as well as the Ku Klux Klan's enthusiastic endorsement of him, alarmed his contemporaries, and he would be the only presidential candidate to have sued a magazine for his supposed psychiatric evaluation by the psychiatrists they surveyed at that time, which is a telling sign that increases the likelihood of their truth. How he might have done with presidential power and how he might have changed the culture with the Goldwater movement so that it would amplify rather than temper his excesses remains unknown, and we will never know. But certainly we know the influence of the Goldwater rule he came to institute. However, we know from countless examples in everyday practice that human beings are malleable and can be managed when necessary. Therefore, as a psychiatrist, I see dangerousness as largely contextual, and the behavior of individuals and society redirectable toward health. And this is the option we lost with Donald Trump, with the exclusion of mental health experts from the public arena. This is why we are once again organizing a major all-day dangerous case of Donald Trump conference in Washington, D.C. at this extremely critical time, more than ever before in our lifetime. This coming September, a little more than a month before the election, we feel we have another opportune moment. The energized presidential campaign has actually lifted us out of hopelessness and opened a window for us, for proper experts to possibly be brought back into the conversation to face some uncomfortable realities. How did we come to allow an unfit person into the office of the US presidency? And how was he allowed to run for the top government position again after attempting to overturn the government? How can we deal with unfit candidates in the future? What can we do about the world order Donald Trump has upended and the dangerous dictators he has emboldened? We predicted all this, which is why the year before the 2020 election, we organized a major conference at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. The Dangerous State of the World and the Need for Fit Leadership conference was considered important enough that it was broadcast for all 3 hours on C-SPAN. As never before or since, we brought together 13 highly respected experts from many different areas of expertise, including psychiatry, political science, economics, journalism, law, climate science, and nuclear science. At this even more critical time, when there is potential for us to have even greater impact, we need to make this a significant live event in Washington as well as online throughout the country. To do so, we will need your help, and I hope you will contribute to our GoFundMe campaign, which will be listed at the bottom of the screen or in my newsletters. Because to do so, we will need to get professionals to work with us to prepare it, widely publicize it, broadcast it live, as well as get C-SPAN once again to cover it. This needs to be a major and newsworthy event, including having members of Congress and major media attending it and covering it. And we will have a new book out titled The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, Psychiatrists and mental health experts warn anew, and we will be able to hear from them and highlight their voices again. The single theme of the conference will be that Donald Trump absolutely must be kept from entering the Oval Office again, and that the 3 criminal trials must all proceed to conclusion. To make this a major talked about event, this all-day conference will open in the morning with short, intense presentations from all the participants. That opening sessions will be followed by a buffet lunch for all who attend. Then there will be a multi-hour afternoon questions and answer sessions and discussion with major media, members of Congress, and also persons online. To conclude the conference, there will be a reception for all attendees, followed by a special limited sit-down dinner with the conference participants and major media people. Then, after the conference is concluded, We need to have a major publicity campaign so that millions will know about it and be able to watch key excerpts from it, which we will have quickly edited and made available. Immediately after the conference, we will need to have a team of professional video editors to put together an hour summary of the key segments, including key questions asked at the conference, along with a selection of short clips of key conference moments, all ready to be quickly put online and circulated to major media for their use within a day or two of the conference. The conference will be only worth doing and have the kind of influence we need to have if it can be done in this major way and be made widely known. We have very limited time now to get everything in motion and to make this happen. This can only happen if we quickly raise the funds needed, and therefore, that is why your help will be essential. An individual donor has been extremely generous, giving us the seed money to conceptualize this in the first place, and a gracious volunteer has started for us this GoFundMe campaign. Please visit the site under this video and also cited in my newsletters. Now, the Democratic National Convention has concluded remarkably successfully. The question we may need to answer is, how will Donald Trump now try to twist and turn this reality into something more tolerable for him? How far will he maneuver to detach the public from reality with him? Who and what will mobilize to place him back in power, since far too many dangerous leaders, oligarchs, and even the US Supreme Court have invested in someone so unfit and so unstable? So these are the questions we will try to answer, and now I turn it over to you. If you'd like to ask your question or give your comments, please click on the React button and raise your hand and unmute yourself before you ask your question. Thank you. Madeline?